When filming videos, there are typically three settings you want to concern yourself with. ISO settings, which I covered in my previous video, aperture, which will be the next video, and shutter speed. Whenever you're focusing on shutter speed as your primary attribute, that means you're probably trying to focus on a lot of fast movement. Shutter speed is the length of time that a camera opens the shutter to let light in and then closes it. A shutter speed of 1 means 1 full second of shutter would be open. So imagine you press the button, it opens up, takes a second, closes. Back in the days, that would let all the light in onto the film. Now it's the light coming in onto your digital camera sensor. The longer you open the shutter, the more light gets let in, but the blurrier your picture is. The less the shutter speed is, then the quicker it closes and opens, and it can get fast-moving objects, but it lets less light in. So it's a nice, delicate balance, and you notice that's why ISO settings and aperture also play a big deal. You notice when we set the ISO setting up, it'd let more light in, and this is maybe because your shutter speed has been cranked up. So this is a nice, delicate balance to, again, the triangle that you have to solve whenever you're trying to expose and get a shot perfect. So when you're focusing on shutter, you probably want to lock that in first, and then you want to go ahead and tweak your other two settings to match. Right now I'm filming at 1/60, which is a 60th shutter speed, which means 1/60 seconds. So essentially it's like 60 frames a second. And conveniently, I'm actually shooting at 60 frames a second. Notice what I did there. And the typical recommendation is shoot 2x your frame rate. Now, I wanted to know why that was. I didn't know. I just was like, I don't know, everybody on YouTube's saying it. That's what you got to do. But I was like, you know what? Let me go figure this out. So I went and did some research, and then I read about the old motion picture days. And so in the old motion picture days, there was motion picture cameras and normal cameras. So still camera, when you press the shutter button, it goes, opens the shutter, closes, exposes the film, and boom, that's how you get your image exposed onto that film. But if you think about a motion picture, it's continuous frames, and so you need to open, close, open, close, open, close, and expose each frame. There were certain cameras that would be like a reel, and it would do kind of what I'm talking about, but for motion, it wasn't always the best. So they eventually invented the rotary shutter, and a rotary shutter is essentially, let's say this side is your film, and then you have a shutter here that spins in a 360-degree rotation. And whenever you have it going, you could have an angle on that, and that angle determines how much light is let in. So at 180 degrees, half of it would be lit, the other half is dark. So it would spin, expose half with light, then it would close, then it would go to the next frame, spin again 180 degrees, expose this, then go to the next frame. It would continuously do so. The 180 degree angle, since everything was shot at 24 frames a second, would do a speed of 1/48. And that was the widest they could go for their angle. The narrower the angle they could do, it would be a quicker shutter speed. Therefore, they would capture quicker motion, and they would have to make sure that the film was moving quick enough to capture those moments. But this really goes back in the day, whenever you're looking at film, if somebody's shooting at 24, you want to do 1/48, mainly because this is what you're comfortable seeing. Right now, this doesn't look natural, like a film look, because I'm shooting at 60 frames a second at 1/60. I really should be doing 60 frames a second at 1/125 because my camera doesn't do exactly 120, and it still wouldn't look natural. What I really need to do is change my camera to 24 and then shoot at 1/48. I'll probably do a bunch of tests here coming up trying to show you different results from shooting at different frames per second and also at different shutter speeds. But to make things easy and consistent, what I'll do is I'm going to switch to 1/30 shutter speed, and I'm going to switch to 30 frames a second. I just wanted to throw 60 in here to show you how kind of fast motion looks when you're shooting at a higher frame rate and a higher shutter speed. I will do some of these tests and we'll go over the results and I'll get back to you. So let's get to the tests. So for this test, I am going to keep it at 60 frames a second, and then I'm going to tweak the shutter speed, and I'm going to keep it live so that you can see the effects of tweaking the shutter speed. So let's go down and drop it low. So you notice there's a lot of light coming in. This is 1/10. Notice how the motion sucks. And it's overexposed because there's more light coming in. So that means the shutter is open for 1/10, 10th of a second. It's open longer to capture each frame. And so it's kind of slow. Let's go to half now at 1/30th. So this is a little bit better, but it's a little unnatural. It's still a little bit blurry because I'm shooting 60 frames a second. It's only capturing half of them. Let's go back to normal now. So here's 60. So this is matching 1:1. Seems all right. Kind of matches. Now let's go to the recommendation of 1/125. So now we're at 1/125. Now this should look very crisp and smooth. The motion here looks very good, but notice it's darker, so I would need to bump my ISO. And now I'm going to bump my ISO here. Note that you would normally need to tweak this better, but the higher I push this up, you're not going to be able to see well. So let's push the ISO up a little bit. So now we're at 400. So now I look a bit better, a little clearer, better exposed. And I know I keep looking away. It's hard to kind of do this and do the test at the same time. Bear with me. So now let's keep bumping that frame, the shutter speed, keeping the frame rate the same. So let's go. This is 1/400. So now look how fast it looks. It's capturing everything beautifully. Let's push it up higher. So we're 1/1000. It's very dark. I'm going to bump the ISO. So this is going to be pretty noisy here. It's 1/1000 is 1600 ISO. But notice the action here, the movement. It's very frenetic looking. So this is a way, maybe if you're doing like some kind of action shot, you film at a certain frame rate and then you bump the ISO big time. And then you bump the shutter speed big time. Now, let's do some tests shooting at 1/24, 24 frames a second. I've tweaked the camera to do 24 frames a second, and I've set the shutter speed to 1/25. So now this should be the film-like effect and the cinema effect with the movement. The blur should feel natural, almost. If you were paying attention earlier, you know it should be 1/48. For real quick, let's just drop it down just to reinforce the point. Here's 1/13, shooting at 24 frames a second. It is blurry. Let's go down to 1/10. Here's 1/10. Notice it's still kind of blurry, bad. You really don't want this. Notice the light, more light's being let in. Now let's bump it to 1/48. My camera can't do exactly 1/48, but it can do 1/50. And so I'm going to tweak the ISO just a little bit to get this picture looking better exposed. And so now, does this look normal? The film effect. Imagine if I was doing some kind of hard thinking right there. I don't know, but this should look kind of natural. Now let's go ahead and bump it way back up, even though we're at 24 frames a second, all the way up to that 1/1000 and see what we get. Notice it's getting dark, very dark. You probably can't even see me. Let's crank this ISO up big time. Now we're at 2000 ISO here. It's going to be noisy back here in this contrasty area, but let's look at how it looks. So notice how it's very crisp, very clean. However, it looks kind of choppy at the same time because it's happening so fast. Let's even go higher. Let's go 1/2000, bump the ISO again. So this is going to be super noisy, but just to show it's moving almost too fast whenever it's moving here. And I'll do these same tests. Let's bump it back down to normal. So here it is normal. Notice how my hand is moving, but this is double the frame rate, but it is kind of natural but unnatural at the same time. It is having trouble focusing here. So just some tests to show you adjusting shutter speed and how it impacts what you're filming. So what did we learn? Couple things. So First, whenever you have the shutter speed closer to 1 full second, there's blurrier motion whenever there's motion going on. But it was letting a lot more light in. So for example, at the 1/10, 1/10 of shutter speed, there was more light let in, however, it's very blurry. Whenever you shoot spot on matching frames per second and shutter speed, it does look pretty good. However, it's not as natural and normal that we're used to seeing. Whenever you double that frame rate with your shutter speed, for example, if I was shooting at 24 frames per second, and then I had a 1/48 shutter speed, that is the most natural look that you'll see on TV and on film. TV, for example, uses a different frame rate. It uses 1/30, 30 frames per second, and 1/60 is how TV would be shot. Film is 24 frames a second and 1/48. One thing you also notice too is the higher the shutter speed went, the darker the scene was, because it was letting less light in. Because imagine it's just like click, click, really quickly closing this shutter, letting little bits of light in. However, the action was so crisp, it almost had a frenetic look to it. That was very interesting. Maybe shooting an action shot, that's something you will use. I don't know. I'll have to figure that out. The takeaways from this is, if you're trying to focus on movement, you probably want to have a high shutter speed and target that first, then deal with your ISO and your aperture secondary. If you're trying to do a combination of all three, you might have to make some compromises here and there, or add more light to your scene. I hope this was informative. I learned a lot today. I learned a good deal about shutter speed and these rotary shutters, which I did not know. I also learned that this camera is actually pretty decent. It does a pretty good job with the shutter speed and letting the light in, despite the noise or whatever, but for this, I think it's going to be acceptable. So if this was helpful for you, please let me know. Give me some feedback. Let me know in the comments or something like that. If it was not useful or if I did something wrong, let me know. I am here to learn, so I'm not afraid to be corrected. I do notice that this right here is very distracting, and so some of these grays here, but that's who I am. I'll probably try to maybe shave that off a little bit. I apologize for that when I was looking at the video. It is very distracting. Maybe now you can't unsee it. That's my video. Next up, I'll do one on aperture. Stay tuned. If this is helpful, please let me know. Thanks. Goodbye.
Serenity.